you. They make small comments to see if you become offended. They question your decisions to see if you rush to defend yourself. They ignore you to see if you desperately seek their attention. They criticize your work to see whether you react emotionally or remain composed. Every small interaction is an experiment. They are collecting data about your mind. Most people fail these tests without realizing they are being tested. Every angry reply, every emotional argument, and every impulsive decision gives the other person another piece of the puzzle. Before long, your enemy understands your psychology better than you understand your own. That is why mentally powerful people never react carelessly. They know someone is always learning from their behavior. The greatest mistake people make is believing they must respond immediately to every challenge. An insult appears, and they answer within seconds. Someone questions their abilities, and they instantly begin explaining themselves. They believe this proves confidence, but in reality, it reveals vulnerability. Every emotional reaction tells your enemy exactly where to attack next. If they know criticism makes you angry, they will criticize you repeatedly. If they discover that disrespect causes you to lose your composure, they will continue disrespecting you until your own emotions destroy your judgment. The psychological battle is already lost because your enemy no longer needs to guess your behavior. They have made your emotions completely predictable. Mentally dangerous people refuse to give their enemies this advantage. They understand that silence creates uncertainty. Imagine provoking someone repeatedly and receiving no emotional reaction. Instead of controlling them, you begin questioning yourself. Did your strategy fail? Did they expect this? Are they planning something else? Suddenly, the psychological pressure shifts. The person trying to manipulate now becomes uncertain because they cannot read the mind in front of them. This is exactly how you outplay your enemies mentally. You force them to make decisions without understanding your emotional state while you quietly observe theirs. Notice what happens when your enemy becomes uncertain. They begin trying harder. They become more aggressive, more impatient, and more careless because their original strategy no longer works. In their frustration, they often reveal their own weaknesses. They expose hidden motives, emotional patterns, and desperate intentions that they would have otherwise concealed. This completely reverses the psychological battle. At first, they were studying your mind. Now you are studying theirs. While they become increasingly emotional, you become increasingly informed. Every failed attempt they make gives you another piece of information. That is why emotional discipline is not passive behavior. It is active psychological strategy. Another ruthless truth is that your enemy cannot manipulate emotions they cannot see. If you never reveal what hurts your pride, what feeds your ego, or what creates fear inside you, they lose access to the most powerful weapon they hope to use. Instead of directing your emotions, they are forced to guess, and guessing creates mistakes. The more they guess, the more unpredictable they become. Meanwhile, your calmness allows you to think clearly, recognize patterns, and choose responses based on logic instead of impulse. Every decision you make becomes more accurate because it is not controlled by the emotional trap your enemy carefully prepared. This does not mean pretending to have no emotions. Every human being experiences anger, disappointment, fear, and frustration. The difference is that mentally powerful people experience these emotions privately before acting publicly. They never allow temporary feelings to become permanent decisions. They understand that the first person to lose emotional control usually loses the psychological advantage. By remaining composed, they deny their enemies the satisfaction of controlling the conversation, the conflict, or the outcome. History repeatedly shows that the strongest strategist is rarely the loudest or the most aggressive. The strongest strategist is the one who remains unreadable while carefully reading everyone else. They understand that information decides psychological battles, and emotional reactions are one of the richest sources of information an enemy can collect. Instead of giving that information away, they protect it with discipline, patience, and silence. While others reveal themselves with every confrontation, they quietly become impossible to predict, because the moment your enemies stop understanding your emotions, they also stop understanding how to control you And that is the moment you begin winning the psychological game before the real battle has even begun. One of the greatest mistakes people make when dealing with rivals is trying to prove their strength too early. The moment they sense competition, they rush to display their intelligence, defend their reputation, or show everyone what they are capable of. They believe respect comes from immediately demonstrating power. But in psychological warfare, this often creates the opposite result. The more you reveal your abilities, the more time your enemies have to prepare against you. Truly strategic people understand a far more effective approach. They allow others to underestimate them until the perfect moment. This is one of the most ruthless psychology tricks because overconfidence is one of the easiest weaknesses to exploit. When your enemy believes you are harmless, they stop thinking carefully, and that is exactly how you begin to outplay them mentally. Human beings naturally judge people based on appearances, first impressions, and small observations. If someone speaks quietly, they are often assumed to lack confidence. If someone avoids unnecessary attention, they are seen as less capable than those constantly promoting themselves. Smart strategists understand this flaw in human psychology. Instead of correcting every false assumption, they quietly allow those assumptions to grow. They know that a person who feels superior becomes careless. The more convinced your enemy becomes that they already understand you, the less effort they invest in studying you. They stop watching closely because they believe the outcome is already decided. That false confidence becomes the opening you were waiting for. Think about how many people destroy their own advantage by trying to impress everyone around them. They announce every achievement, explain every skill, and constantly remind others of their potential. They believe they are building respect, but they are also giving competitors valuable information. Your enemies begin measuring your strengths, identifying your habits, and preparing strategies to neutralize what you have already revealed. By the time the real challenge arrives, nothing about you is unexpected. Mentally powerful people avoid this mistake completely. They understand that the less people know about your true ability, the harder it becomes to prepare against you. This is why allowing yourself to be underestimated is one of the most effective ways to outplay your enemies mentally. Notice how arrogant people behave when they believe they have already won. They stop paying attention to details. They underestimate risks. They ignore warning signs because confidence slowly turns into complacency. This is one of the oldest psychological patterns in human behavior. The mind becomes lazy when it believes victory is guaranteed. A strategic thinker recognizes this immediately. Instead of challenging that confidence too early, they quietly let it grow. Every moment your enemy becomes more certain of your weakness is another moment they become less prepared for your strength. By remaining patient, you allow them to build the very illusion that will eventually work against them. There is another psychological advantage to staying underestimated. It gives you the freedom to observe without becoming the center of attention. People reveal far more when they do not see you as a threat. They speak more openly, expose their plans more freely, and become less careful about protecting their weaknesses. While they are focused on proving themselves, you are quietly gathering information. You begin understanding their habits, emotional triggers, decision-making patterns, and predictable behaviors. By the time they finally realize you are more capable than they assumed, you already understand them far better than they understand you. This shift in awareness is exactly how you outplay your enemies mentally. Patience is what separates a strategist from an impulsive competitor. Many people cannot tolerate being underestimated because their ego demands immediate recognition. They feel an irresistible urge to prove everyone wrong as quickly as possible. But every premature display of strength reduces the element of surprise. Strategic people think differently. They are willing to remain unnoticed today if it creates a greater advantage tomorrow. They understand that victory is not earned by satisfying the ego. It is earned by controlling the timing. They reveal their true ability only when it creates the greatest psychological impact and leaves their opponent with no time to recover. This does not mean pretending to be weak or manipulating people through deception in every situation. It means refusing to feel pressured to display everything you are capable of. Confidence does not need constant demonstration. The strongest individuals are often comfortable allowing others to hold inaccurate opinions because they know reality will eventually correct those opinions on its own. Their focus remains on preparation rather than performance, on competence rather than appearance. That quiet discipline protects their advantage until the exact moment it matters most. The greatest psychological reversal happens when your enemy suddenly realizes they misunderstood you from the very beginning. The person they dismissed has become the person they cannot predict. The individual they ignored now controls the situation. Their confidence disappears because the mental picture they built no longer matches reality. Confusion replaces certainty, hesitation replaces arrogance, and mistakes begin to multiply. They are forced to react while you continue acting with preparation and clarity. By simply allowing them to underestimate you, you have quietly taken control of the psychological battlefield without ever announcing your intentions. Because the smartest victory comes when your enemies realize your true strength only after their own overconfidence has already guaranteed your advantage. Most people believe they gain an advantage by speaking more than everyone else. They enter every conversation determined to prove how intelligent they are, defend every opinion, and make sure their presence is noticed. But if your goal is to outplay your enemies mentally, this approach works against you. Every unnecessary word becomes a clue. Every explanation reveals part of your strategy. Every emotional story exposes something about your fears, ambitions, or weaknesses. The greatest psychological advantage belongs to the person who gathers more information than they reveal. This is why mastering silence is one of the most ruthless psychology tricks. The less your enemies know about you, and the more you know about them, the more control you quietly gain over every future encounter. Before people try to defeat you, they first try to understand you. They listen carefully to discover what motivates you, what frustrates you, what excites you, and what distracts you. They are looking for patterns that make your behavior predictable. Most people unknowingly help them by talking too much. They reveal future plans, explain personal struggles, complain about frustrations, and react emotionally to ordinary conversations. Without realizing it, they are handing their enemies a psychological blueprint. Every sentence gives away another piece of information that can later be used against them. Mentally powerful people understand this danger. They never confuse openness with wisdom. They know that information is a form of power, and power is protected, not carelessly distributed. Instead of trying to dominate every conversation, they become students of human behavior. They ask thoughtful questions, remain patient, and allow silence to do the work. Most people become uncomfortable when a conversation grows quiet. They rush to fill the silence because they mistake it for awkwardness. In doing so, they begin revealing far more than they intended. They talk about disappointments, ambitions, relationships, fears, and opinions without being asked. The silent observer simply listens. They understand that every extra minute another person speaks is another opportunity to understand how that person thinks. This is exactly how you begin to outplay your enemies mentally. You collect information while revealing almost nothing in return. One of the most overlooked truths about psychology is that people rarely hide their true nature for very long. Given enough time, they expose themselves through repetition. The person obsessed with status constantly mentions success. The insecure person repeatedly seeks approval. The jealous person cannot resist criticizing others. The manipulative person often speaks differently to different people. These patterns become obvious only to those who are paying attention instead of preparing their next response. Your enemies reveal their strengths, weaknesses, habits, and intentions every day, but only the silent observer notices them. That awareness becomes a strategic advantage long before any real conflict begins. Silence also creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the strongest psychological weapons available. When you constantly explain yourself, your enemies quickly learn how you think. They know what to expect from you because you have already revealed your reasoning. But when you speak only when necessary, they are left guessing. They begin asking themselves difficult questions. What are you planning? Why didn't you react? What are you thinking? That uncertainty forces them to spend mental energy trying to understand you instead of focusing completely on their own strategy. Without making a single aggressive move, you have shifted the psychological pressure onto them. There is another reason silence is so effective in mental warfare. People often reveal the truth when they believe they are in control. If your enemy thinks you know very little, they become overconfident. They explain too much, boast too much, and underestimate your awareness. They believe they are directing the conversation, while in reality, they are providing you with valuable intelligence. The more comfortable they become, the less carefully they protect their intentions. Meanwhile, you continue observing every detail, their tone, their confidence, their contradictions, their emotional reactions, and the habits they cannot hide. By the time they realize how much you have learned, the advantage already belongs to you. Mentally powerful people also understand that silence protects their own strategy. They never announce every plan before taking action. They never reveal every opinion simply because someone asks. They understand that once information leaves your mouth, it no longer belongs to you. It becomes something other people can analyze, challenge, or use against you. Every unnecessary explanation reduces your flexibility because your enemies begin preparing for the version of you they believe they understand. By remaining disciplined with your words, you preserve the freedom to adapt without warning. That unpredictability makes you far more difficult to outmaneuver. The greatest strategists are rarely remembered for speaking the most. They are remembered for understanding people better than people understood them. They entered conversations with curiosity instead of ego. They listened more than they argued. They observed more than they performed. While everyone else competed to appear intelligent, they quietly collected the information that eventually allowed them to stay several moves ahead. Their victories were not accidents. They were the result of patience, observation, and disciplined silence. Because the moment you know more about your enemies than they know about you, the psychological game begins shifting in your favor long before they realize they have already lost. One of the greatest advantages you can ever have over an enemy is becoming impossible to predict. Most people live their lives according to visible patterns. They react the same way to criticism, respond at the same speed, follow the same routines, and solve problems using the same methods. At first, these habits seem harmless, but to an observant enemy, they become a roadmap. Once someone can predict your behavior, they no longer need to guess your next move. They simply prepare for it. This is why one of the most ruthless psychology tricks is to control expectations and then deliberately break the pattern. The moment your enemies stop predicting you accurately, they begin making mistakes, and that is how you mentally outplay them. The human brain is designed to search for patterns because patterns create certainty. Every day, people make assumptions based on repeated behavior. If someone always answers immediately, they expect another quick reply. If someone always becomes angry when criticized, they expect the same emotional reaction. If someone always chooses the safest option, they assume risk will never be taken. Your enemies use this natural tendency against you. They study your routines, your timing, your emotional responses, and your decision-making habits until they believe they understand exactly how your mind works. Most people never realize this is happening. They unknowingly train others to predict them through consistent automatic behavior. The smartest strategists understand that predictability is a psychological weakness. They never allow themselves to become completely readable. They remain consistent in their principles, but flexible in their methods. Their values do not change, but the way they execute their plans does. Sometimes they respond immediately, sometimes they wait. Sometimes they remain silent when everyone expects an argument. Other times they act decisively when everyone assumes they will hesitate. These calculated shifts force their enemies into uncertainty. Instead of confidently preparing for the next move, the opponent begins questioning every assumption they previously trusted. That uncertainty weakens judgment and creates hesitation, giving the strategic thinker the psychological advantage. Imagine a chess player who repeats the same opening in every match. At first, it may produce victories because opponents are unfamiliar with it. But after enough games, Experienced players begin studying the pattern. They recognize every move before it happens and prepare the perfect response. The strategy that once created success now becomes a weakness because it has become predictable. The same principle applies in every psychological conflict. Your enemies do not need to be smarter than you if they already know what you are going to do. By changing your timing, adjusting your responses, and refusing to behave exactly as expected, you force them to think instead of react automatically. That is one of the clearest ways to outplay your enemies mentally. Another powerful aspect of breaking patterns is that it disrupts emotional manipulation. Many people attempt to control others by relying on familiar reactions. They know which words usually provoke anger, which situations create fear, and which behaviors trigger insecurity. But what happens when the expected reaction never arrives? The manipulator becomes confused. They repeat the same tactic, yet it no longer produces the same result. Suddenly, they begin doubting their own strategy instead of controlling yours. Without realizing it, they lose confidence because the psychological script they depended on has stopped working. This reversal is incredibly powerful because confusion often leads people to reveal more than they intended. Controlling expectations does not mean behaving randomly or creating chaos for its own sake. Random behavior is difficult to sustain and often damages trust. True psychological strategy is intentional. You remain disciplined, but you refuse to become mechanical. Your enemies should never be able to say with complete certainty, I know exactly what this person will do next. That uncertainty forces them to prepare for multiple possibilities instead of one predictable outcome. Every additional possibility increases their mental pressure while preserving your freedom to choose the most effective response. There is another psychological benefit that most people overlook. When you consistently surprise your enemies, they begin second-guessing themselves. Instead of focusing entirely on attacking you, they become occupied with analyzing every decision you make. They wonder whether your silence has a hidden meaning, whether your delay is intentional, or whether your unexpected action is part of a larger strategy. Their attention shifts away from executing their own plan and toward trying to understand yours. This mental distraction is one of the greatest invisible advantages in any competition. While they are trapped inside uncertainty, your mind remains focused on the objective rather than the confusion. History repeatedly rewards people who refuse to become prisoners of their own habits. The strongest leaders, negotiators, and strategists understood that flexibility is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of intelligence. They adapted to changing circumstances without abandoning their purpose. They never allowed success to become routine because routine eventually becomes predictable. Every time they sensed that others believed they had them completely figured out, they quietly changed the rhythm of the game. Their enemies kept preparing for the person they used to be while failing to recognize the person standing in front of them. The greatest psychological victories rarely come from overwhelming force. They come from making your opponents doubt the assumptions they were certain about only moments earlier. Once certainty disappears, hesitation takes its place. Once hesitation appears, mistakes follow naturally. And once your enemies begin questioning their own judgment instead of understanding yours, the mental battle has already started moving in your favor, because the moment your enemies can no longer predict your next move, they stop controlling the game and start reacting to yours. One of the most ruthless psychology tricks you can ever master is making your enemies question their own judgment instead of trying to change yours. Most people believe the fastest way to win a psychological battle is through louder arguments, stronger opinions, or direct confrontation. But experienced strategists understand that the mind becomes weakest not when it is attacked, but when it begins doubting itself. The moment your enemy starts questioning their own decisions, their confidence begins to collapse from within. This is why mentally powerful people rarely waste energy proving others wrong. Instead, they remain so calm, so consistent, and so emotionally controlled that their opponents slowly lose trust in their own assumptions. That is how you truly outplay your enemies mentally. Every psychological conflict begins with expectation. Your enemy enters the situation believing they already understand you. They expect you to become angry after an insult. They expect you to defend yourself when accused. They expect you to panic under pressure or become impatient when delayed. Their entire strategy depends on these expectations being correct. But the moment you refuse to react the way they predicted, something unexpected happens inside their mind. Instead of controlling your emotions, they begin wondering whether they misunderstood the situation completely. Their confidence weakens because certainty is replaced by doubt. This is the first crack in their psychological armor. Most people cannot tolerate uncertainty for very long. When their expectations fail, they immediately try again. They repeat the same manipulation using stronger words, greater pressure, or more obvious provocation. They believe they simply have not pushed hard enough. But every failed attempt increases their frustration. They expected control, yet they found resistance without confrontation. They expected emotion, yet they found composure. They expected predictable behavior, yet they encountered discipline. Without realizing it, they stop analyzing you and begin questioning themselves. They ask whether their strategy is wrong, whether they misread your personality, or whether you know something they do not. This mental shift is exactly what you wanted because confused people make careless decisions. Notice how emotionally reactive people often expose themselves while trying to regain control. They speak more than necessary, they become impatient, they repeat arguments that no longer work. They overestimate their own position and underestimate yours. Every failed attempt to manipulate you drains their emotional stability while yours remains intact. The psychological balance quietly changes. At the beginning, they believed they were controlling the game. Now they are reacting to a situation they no longer understand. That is one of the clearest signs that you are beginning to outplay your enemies mentally. Another powerful strategy is remaining completely consistent with your principles while refusing to be emotionally predictable. Your enemies may attack your reputation, your decisions, or your confidence because they hope inconsistency will appear. They are searching for contradictions they can exploit. But when your actions remain calm regardless of the circumstances, they lose the ability to create emotional chaos around you. They begin wondering why nothing seems to shake your confidence. Instead of finding weakness, they find stability. Over time, that stability becomes psychologically intimidating because people naturally expect pressure to produce visible cracks. When those cracks never appear, doubt shifts from your mind into theirs. Confidence is contagious, but so is uncertainty. If your enemy sees you becoming nervous, they become bolder. If they see you becoming defensive, they become more aggressive. But when they repeatedly encounter calm confidence, they begin absorbing your emotional stability instead of imposing their own emotional pressure. Suddenly, they hesitate before making another move. They rethink decisions that once felt obvious. They become slower because every assumption now feels uncertain. Their greatest weapon was confidence, yet your discipline quietly turned it against them. There is another reason this psychology trick is so effective. People trust their own judgment only when reality continues confirming it. The moment reality repeatedly proves them wrong, that trust begins disappearing. If your enemy predicts that you will react emotionally and you remain calm, they are wrong. If they assume you will make a reckless decision and you choose patience, they are wrong again. If they believe they have successfully manipulated you, only to discover they misunderstood the situation completely, another prediction collapses. Eventually, they begin doubting every conclusion they make about you. They stop acting with certainty because they no longer trust their own ability to read your mind. Once this happens, they become mentally slower while your thinking remains clear. Mentally powerful people never rush this process. They understand that psychological victories are built gradually. Every calm response, every measured decision, and every refusal to react emotionally adds another layer of uncertainty inside the opponent's mind. They are not trying to win a single argument. They are quietly changing the entire psychological balance of the relationship. While others become obsessed with defeating the enemy publicly, they focus on weakening the enemy's confidence privately. That invisible victory is far more lasting because people who stop trusting their own judgment eventually begin defeating themselves. The greatest strategists understand that the strongest psychological weapon is not fear, but uncertainty. Fear often produces resistance, but uncertainty produces hesitation. A hesitant enemy cannot think clearly, cannot plan confidently, and cannot